Welcome to the virtual office hours. It's March the 29th, and for the first time this year, it's outside here for me because it's 6 p.m. and we do switch time, so it's definitely springtime. I hope it got a bit warmer on your end as well, and that the winter blues that we talked about the last time are getting a bit easier on you. While we're at it, I will say that the next 2 weeks, because it's the Easter holidays, we'll take 2 weeks of break. Just so you know, I will post it as well in our Facebook group. And I hope that you enjoyed Janina's well-being workshop. Yes, you liked it. Wonderful. I would love to hear from you if you can before I get into the topic of today. Is there something in particular that you didn't know and you learned or you realized, or in a way in which it helped you in particular? Yeah, I saw you with the tune-up ball there. Hi, and I do want to say that the tennis ball works just fine. Although I have to give credit to the tune-up balls. When you try, it really does move the fascia, but that doesn't mean that you cannot do it with the tennis ball. It still works really, really well. Were you able to do that after the workshop as well?
Yeah, so I love the tune-up balls, as you call them.
Mhm.
I won them at some event and wasn't really sure what to do with them.
Yeah.
I'm sure she explained it to me, but anyway, I had forgotten about them. So when Janina was doing the fascia, I remembered, I thought, oh, I've got those balls, because I've done it with the tennis ball as well, and it can be effective, but I loved everything about that session, like everything. Um, Really helpful things. I've got, like I told Yanina, I am just learning that the fascia is the whole body. I always thought for some strange reason that it was just the bottom half, like in the sort of buttocks and upper thighs, and I didn't realize how much um, our upper body is affected by the lower body, and the fascia being tight down there obviously affects the top. So it was really, I loved the particular order of the exercises as she did it, because it seemed to be like for me anyway, a progressive release and I have advanced carpal tunnel syndrome, and they've told me, and I shared this last week, that the only, of course, this is, the doctor telling me this, that the only solution is for me to have surgery. So my goal is to not have surgery and do so. That was really, really helpful for me in particular with that stuff, and I have been doing it, and so I'm going to make you laugh, maybe. So every morning I have a lemon drink. And so what I've been doing, I had heard somewhere long ago that if you roll the lemon, it actually softens it a bit and you get more juice out of it. Well, now I do it with intention of also doing the thumb. So I'm more intentional about when I'm rolling my lemon I'm basically using the lemon as of the ball. And at least, getting that release in the thumb area and the wrist area, because I wake up every morning like almost fully numb, and so for me it's just been a game changer of, like, I now start my day with releasing in these areas, and then later when I have a little more time I work on the upper forearms, because for me that's where I really need it right now. So I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
That's wonderful. And yeah, so the idea with these well-being workshops is that, yes, of course, we talked a lot about self-care for ourselves and for our clients, but sometimes it's just difficult to come up with something that you can actually do in practical terms. So this would be a very good self-care practice, whether you do it in the morning like you do, Leah, or before bed. If you try before bed, I would love to see if you can sleep better. I found that to be true. That what Janina did, it's a shorter, maybe faster version of it, does deepen my sleep. And of course, this was the first workshop because there is a huge connection between fascia and the psoas muscle. and you will see how it affect each other. So when there's a tension in a muscle, it does affect fascia, and the other way around, especially with the psoas muscle. If you think about it, in these movements that are involved in the fight and flight response, if there's a threat, the psoas is always part of it. Whether you want to punch somebody or you want to defend against them or push them away, it always is a movement that does involve the psoas muscle. And if that movement is blocked, then the psoas muscle will be blocked. And as a result, the fascia as well. So it makes sense to know the whole story. Now, with the GTR protocols, we give you the results of that. You didn't have to know any of this. But apart from being a great self-care practice, now you're getting a fuller picture. Of course, the comfy spots, the kind of movement that we do with them, that's a fascia movement. We're not going into the muscle, because when people talk about fascia being dehydrated, it doesn't literally mean that we have to drink more. It just means that it's not sliding the way it should be, and that it's getting dry, and therefore your muscles and other parts of the body have to compensate for the kind of work that well hydrated fascia does. And what Janina showed you in the well-being workshop, that's what hydrates the fascia too. I see 2 hands raised. Thank you, Leah. So I'll go to Moraine and Taryn, and we'll see where that leads us. Hi, Moraine. How are you?
Hi, everyone. I just had a really quick question.
Yeah.
So the psoas, is it somewhere in the hip area?
Yes, there's a lecture on the psoas muscle. I can reply to your question, but just so you know, there's a detailed lecture in the deep care module about the psoas. So please watch it before the next workshop, which will take place on April the 26th. But just a short answer, it's a special kind of muscle. It's a muscle that goes from your lower back through the pelvis into the thigh. And that's why it's so involved in the fight or flight, because whether we're running or whether we're defending ourselves, etc., the psoas is always involved. In fact, the reason why we do the rock and soothe motion, now I can reveal the whole truth, is because we want to engage the psoas muscle as we do that. When I put the GTR training together, I didn't want to bother you with all these anatomical details. And it is true that most of this is the vagus nerve, and all of these other parts, the psoas and the fascia, are connected with the vagus nerve. But now you're getting the fuller picture. So there will be a great well-being workshop, and we will give you the details. Just know that one will be more, some exercises might be done on the floor, so you will want comfortable clothes, and Nina will be there for you all the way long. Taryn, I'm coming from you, Maureen. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Yes, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Taryn, you're on.
Hi, all my great friends. Love you all. But this is an interesting conversation. I'm writing a book, and we're writing a book, and one of the things that came out of a book class that I'm taking about writing is that everybody's hearing about trauma, but nobody knows how to heal it, and they don't know what to do with it, and they don't teach them that. And so in writing my first article, my first story, people are reviewing it and saying, well, what can they do and what can they say? And I said, well, I can't tell them about the gentle trauma release, but what's really interesting to me, I started thinking about my own healing process, and I was going through a lot of things before I got to gentle trauma release. I was in empowerment. Before that, I quit drinking, and there was all these things that I was doing. And I at the time, didn't really know why, but I think that it was my body telling me things, right? And so you're talking about how do you spell the psoas muscle?
PSOAS, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. And just recently I started walking. I kept telling myself I was going to go for a walk, because I kept hearing in my brain that I needed to take a walk. My body was saying, Taryn, you got to walk. If you want to lose the rest of this weight, you got to walk. You're doing everything else. I'm doing boxing and I added swimming, but you've got to walk. And so I was looking at this pond down the street from me, and I was like, I can walk around that, one time. And so and everyone's telling you, you have to have 10,000 steps a day, right? And so I'm like, 10,000 steps, that sounds like so much, right? You know, it's so much, it's so much. So I got out and I had my phone in my pocket and I walked around this lake one time. And when I got to the end, I said, okay, I'm gonna look at the time. I'm gonna see how much I had walked 1,000 steps. I was like, that was 1,000 steps. And I was like, I could do that 10 times. That's not a big deal. I'm like, okay, but I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to do next time, I'm going to do 2, and then I'm going to do 3. And I saw now I'm on 4 times around. But I got 8,000 steps the other day, and yesterday I was at 10,000 steps. And so I think I can do, I'm like, this is really easy. And it goes back to this whole idea that, you know, people tell us what we need to do, but they don't explain how you can start, like places you can start. And what you're saying right now here, as you were talking about the psoas muscle and you talked about the thighs, I'm like, oh my God, okay. That's why there's the you know, rocking and soothing, because of that muscle. And I think that's so important that, you know, it sounds like it's too scientific, but I think when we're talking to people or looking for, when we meet people that aren't yet ready for GTR, this telling them to do these kinds of things makes so much sense. Like I was thinking, you know, everyone says go out in nature. Okay, yeah, I love nature, but go out at nature and look up at the trees. That's as easy as the, you know, the eye movement, right? If I don't have to tell them the eye movement, I can just say, just go outside and just for 10 times, just look up to the sky. They don't need to, you know, and they start feeling that in their body. It's just phenomenal. It's fascinating to me because I think that it's a matter of telling people not what to do, but listening to your body and responding to what it's asking of you. Like my body literally was telling me to walk. And I was like, okay, I'll walk. And then everyone's like, you got to do 10,000 steps. And I'm like, that's going to take forever. But I walked around one time with my phone and I was at 1,000. I was like, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. So I think it's how we communicate that to people is really important if we want people to then move into gentle trauma release. Because I wasn't there a year before this. You know, when I quit drinking, I had no idea that all this was going to come up, right? And it's just amazing to me how your body starts to respond.
Yeah, and you know, Taryn, it's the natural healing mechanisms of the body, really. And somebody once asked in these virtual office hours about, you know, why the eye movements, etc. And there's so much about the eye movements and why the eye movements. If you think about sleep, the REM phase of the sleep is the one where we do the eye movements. And the REM phase is designed to help you process the events of your life and actually to sort of disconnect the emotional side of things that is too heavy or difficult. It's really like a little bit of a detox so that you keep the information and not the emotional charge. And, you know, oftentimes with certain mental health conditions and even trauma, people have a hard time sleeping well or sleeping deep enough or staying in the REM phase. And so they can't do the eye movements, but it is the eye movements that help us process the emotional side of things. And that's why when you walk somebody through the basic recipe, for example, they will remember just the way you remember when you wake up what happened to you, but there's not the charge that holds you back and keeps you paralyzed in life. So that's the idea behind that. If we have a little bit of time, I actually wanted to talk about the module 5, and we don't have to if there's things that you want to share. But I did actually want to give you a little bit of an introduction to how all these recipes came to be and the elements. And it's very much of what you were talking about, ladies, today. Mary Elizabeth, I am coming to you. I think you might need to.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure. And then
as we are talking about these things, for all of us that are, new to coaching, I mean, when I talk to people about trauma, I'm like, I was one of the first few, and there's not very many of us right now. Is there a way that we could put these things together so that we can start explaining to people about their body and how to start working on their body so that when they're ready for GTR, we get them, but if they're not quite there yet, we're giving them something that can help them get to that place.
You're practically talking about marketing. So
No.
the marketing really is, I think, at its best, is helping someone understand what they can do about the problem that they have and how they can get the help.
Mhm.
And yes, so if I was thinking of how to do this for your own practices, then it would be sharing snippets of what it is that heals trauma and helping them realize that this information is something that you use in your own practice and that you can help them with that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, I think we talked about this, Taryn, in one of these virtual office hours. I did say that I considered writing a book about GTR, but the thing that held me back from it was that even though it's simple, the devil is in the details. And so a person might read it, but for example, might not be able to identify a core traumatic event. I mean, that's one of the skills that are so very important to hone, because we get clients who think something is traumatic and it's not, and vice versa. Of course, when they're dissociated, they may not recognize it.
But even if they don't have the main event, if you're teaching them little things where they're looking at life in the world differently, it's getting them to that place. It's getting them to the place where they're ready for GTR. Now that I've gone through GTR, I can go back to everything that happened to me, all the things that I did to heal myself, not necessarily thinking I was healing myself, but trying to be a better person. I can now connect it. I can say, oh, okay, I understand why I did that. Now I understand why quitting drinking was important. I understand why giving up pizza, my body was telling me no more pizza. And I had started listening to it. And that was before gentle trauma release. So it's kind of like being more aware of your body and the things that it's telling you, I think is so important. Even Leah saying, I've got this and I don't want to have surgery. So I'm paying attention to it. I'm beginning to understand. I knew nothing about the muscles in my body. I didn't care about my body. I really didn't. I was thinking about that the other day. I said, I really didn't pay attention to anything as it related to my body. I just pushed it away. And I think getting people into that space really gets them to understand how GTR can help them. I go back to God all the time. All this happens because God just puts it in front of me and says, Taryn, you're not listening. You're not listening to your body. You're not paying attention. Pay attention. And I think that's how we can help people.
Yes, and also just to add something to what you said, Taryn. So one thing is that when you let go of trauma, you are associated with your body and you can actually listen to it. And number two, you have the option to decide what you're going to do with that information.
Right.
So for example, whereas before you might have known that, pizza is not the best choice, but you might not have been able to stop yourself from having it. Or, so it gives you the choice. It might still not be a choice that is easy to make or to follow up on, but at least there's the choice. Whereas trauma doesn't leave you a choice other than responding to a trigger in a traumatic way.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Okay, we're going to Mary Elizabeth. I think you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to speak to the session last week because I found it really helpful for me. And I think a big part of the problem in my body is the fascia, which I didn't know about. I mean, I knew the term, but I hadn't really investigated it. So what I found interesting, I loved everything about the workshop, but what I was really noticing, and I mentioned this in the group last week, was that when I was working with the tennis ball, but when I started working with it, I thought, oh, I don't really have any discomfort here. But as I worked with it, little spots would come up and then applying a little more pressure and they would release. But what I also found, and I mentioned to Janina, was that it was like another part of my body was waking up and saying, pay attention to me. And for me, it was very interesting because it's very difficult for me to feel things in my body. But I know I still have a lot of trauma that I haven't released, even though I've done considerable work on that. But it's just, yeah, so I found that very, very helpful. And I also found it very relaxing and doing it. And I have slept better this week. So, you know, I haven't specifically done it just before bed, but I have done it during the day. And I do find that I'm sleeping better, longer and a little deeper, I think.
Yes, that's wonderful news because you said, you know, you had a therapist who worked with you on in that strategy that they often use to get you sleep later. So yes, try that before bed. It will deepen your sleep. I actually measured mine with the app that I mentioned, and I could see that the waves were deeper and I was in the deep delta sleep for much longer but on the days where I did that before bed. And I also want to say it's such an excellent self-care practice for the body, for the overall balance, even if you don't have the time to work out or do things like that. Just combine that with walking. One thing I would like to say to all of you to encourage you to do that for your own well-being is we ran this workshop on, I think in September in the graduate club for the first time. And since then I was doing it almost on a daily basis before bed. Maybe for 10 minutes before sleeping. And maybe 2 months ago, I went to a massage therapist and he did something called, I don't know what's it called in English, but here they call it soft techniques, but soft doesn't mean it's you know, gentle or relaxing. They basically take the skin on your back and they kind of roll it. Like when you're kneading a dough and they're just going up your back like that, grabbing on a skin. And normally for most people, it's very painful. And there are parts on the back that the skin cannot be lifted at all. And so this massage therapist, I was new to him. I didn't know him from before. And he said that he doesn't remember seeing a back in such a good state before. And I asked him if it's more difficult for other people. He said he himself would be through the roof if somebody did that to him, and that the skin that he was lifting on my lower back, that it wouldn't be possible to lift it. And I do think that even though I you know, do other things like try to have a good posture, hydrate, etc., I do think that just these simple techniques with a tennis ball, not even a special ball, made this difference. So I hope this encourages you to continue doing this practice.
Did want to ask, what are the special balls that you're talking about?
There's something called Yoga Tune-Up. It's a Canadian lady whose name is Jill Miller. You can order those balls. And there are, I think, 3 kinds of balls, but you really need the smallest and the bigger ones. And I do it both for my hands and for my feet in that 10-minute practice, just rolling over. So
Are
there's that.
are those the things that Lucy teaches?
Yes, that's what Lucy teaches. And but I do want to repeat, you don't need a special equipment. The tennis ball is just fine. But if you want to upgrade, you can have the Yoga Tune-Up balls.
These are them, and this is really going to make you laugh. They actually are called tune-up balls. It says tune-up
No,
balls.
that's what it said that, yes.
That I never even noticed before until you were talking about tune-up balls. These are what they are.
Yeah, her thing is Yoga Tune-Up, and if you've been using
This
any
is the person. Must be the same person. This is
That's
Yoga
Jill Miller.
Tune-Up.
Yes, that's her. That's her. If you're in Canada and in the US, you shouldn't have difficulty ordering that. She has a bigger ball, gorgeous ball. That's for a different technique we will be doing in the graduate club, abdominal massage as well. But for what Janina taught you, just these small ones, the one you had and the green one, Leah, is more than enough. Kathy, we're ready for you.
Hello, beautiful ladies. I love this conversation about the psoas muscle and the hip area. So I have been doing some investigation on my own. I've been, so my body has been speaking to me, and it's the lower part of my body. And we learned so much about the psoas muscle and how it affects everything down there and the fascia. And I like to think of the fascia in Italian, in Latin or Italian, fascia means to bind. So,
Yeah.
so I've been experiencing some mild bladder issues, but I went to a specialist. I had a cystoscopy. I had every test done to me. Everything is normal. So I had to investigate what's going on. So I had to find out, and my journey led me to the pelvic floor.
Yeah.
The pelvic floor, I discovered, I'm sure you know this, Isabella, holds our trauma. I did not know that. I knew that we hold trauma in the psoas muscle for women in the hip area. And if you look at it from like the chakra, this is our sacral, this is where we create. And if you think of the root chakra, how the root holds everything up. And if we go to the root cause, what's going on in that system, the roots, my family roots, what is the root to this issue in my pelvic floor issue? And it goes back to what I experienced in my life. So I'm having all this discomfort, all this irritation. I'm thinking it's something physical. It's manifesting in a physical way, but it's actually psychosomatic. But my pelvic floor is telling me, sweetheart, you've got work to do. It's okay. You can start breathing. You can start letting go. And I've done a lot of work on myself, and I've worked with other practitioners, and I've released a lot of trauma, but I believe that there's still more to investigate. And just knowing that, you know, so many, as women, we feel so ashamed to say, hey, if I stand too long, you know, I may feel like I need to run, or I have to get up in the middle of the night. And they think it's an age thing, or you have to have had children or surgeries, and there's something going on with the bladder. But knowing that our body is our messenger. And when I think of the bladder, I'm thinking, okay, well, what's pissing me off? What's not sitting right in my body? And now being educated on the pelvic floor, I feel like I've discovered, like, I want to say eureka, that there's so much healing just knowing this, and so much information. And I'm wondering maybe if we can investigate this further, because how many women don't want to talk about it? And, you know, we talk about working out. We're taught to work out like men work out. We're not taught that it's natural and safe to move our hips, to let go, to walk in a feminine way. I know I was shamed for having a wiggle. I have a natural Andriano wiggle. We wiggle, okay? I was shamed for having a wiggle. My first slap that I got was on my honeymoon because he said I wiggled too much. I stopped wiggling. I stopped wiggling. I was very conscientious. I became very conscientious how I walk. So the hip movements. So I feel like, I think what I'm trying to say is I really want women to own our power and know that it's okay to let go. And I think we have to really heal the pelvic floor and the sacral area, and knowing that we hold so much trauma there. I feel like, and I learned another thing, that when we're in freeze response, there's diarrhea. When we're in the sympathetic state, there's constipation. So you would think that it's the reverse. And so I met with the physiotherapist she deals only with pelvic floor. What's her name? Your pelvic health physiotherapist. This is her specialty. And I was just like, so I told her what I did and how we were talking about, she's so into the polyvagal theory, long story short, so this physiotherapist is going to book a session with me. She wants to do some GTR. So I just, like you said, Taryn, how God puts people in front of you or situations in front of you. But I know this is a long, like I'm long-winded. I hope it's not long-winded, but I think where I'm going with this is there's so much knowledge in the psoas muscle. There's so much knowledge for us as women that we hold so much in our hips. And I think there's the knowledge that we have really been oppressed and suppressed and not let to be who we are. I'm going to start crying because it really touches my heart. We're not allowed to be who we're meant to be. And I don't want this to go on. I want to heal generations of women, because we shouldn't feel ashamed to say, oh my goodness, I'm standing and there's a leak. But wait a minute, why is there a leak? What happened? And then you investigate, well, this is what happened. This happened to me, that happened to me, that happened to me. And it's all there. So there's nothing wrong with me. But for the longest time, I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? No, it's what's right with me. What's right with me is my body's telling me, sweetheart, time has come, you're ready. So I really think that maybe moving forward with GTR and with Yanina, maybe we can work on the pelvic floor, because I think it's so important for women. Because if we think of the pelvic floor, it just holds everything up. It holds us up. And I think that's where we hold our power. I know we hold it in the solar plexus, but for me, understanding this is where we hold our power as well, because our power has been taken away in that particular part of our body in physiology. Sorry, ladies. It's really touching.
Nothing to apologize for. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you also for letting us know what you need. And I always appreciate you telling me what it is that you'd like to be added to the program or then to the graduate club. You know, my whole goal is not to just teach you the GTR method, but also to support you in any way I can so that you actually continue doing it and helping people with it. So whatever it is that you need, I'm happy to hear that. A few comments to that. There are several places that trauma likes to reside. Yes, the pelvic floor is definitely one of them. Then there's head and shoulders, and then there's this area, the jaw, which is why in most people with trauma, one of those areas, if not all of them, will be either tight or sometimes very loose. Like you see when somebody just gives up their numb, it's just almost too loose. There's no muscle tone. Pelvic floor trauma tends to be trauma of sexual nature a lot of the times, to the point that I've heard so many stories in the lines of somebody was to a pelvic floor specialist, and during the exam, the woman started to cry and getting emotional and remembered something. And in fact, there's somebody who told me specifically that when they were having this experience of being checked by a pelvic floor specialist, and she started to cry, she said to the specialist, "You just touched a traumatic memory at some point." And yes, that is all related to the psoas muscle too. It can get tight, or there can be lumps and things like that, and that then affects the fascia and vice versa. So that's how all these balances come to be. The pelvic floor is huge for women specifically. Absolutely. And I'll talk to you, Nina, to see if there's something that we can add, probably to the graduate club. So there are a lot of good things waiting for you. And that's also the reason why we incorporated the jaw massage. So many people have it, that their jaw is just tight. Many people have pain in the jaw. I mean, it's a natural instinct when there's something you want to express but can't. You know, we do that.
Yeah, it's so true. Because I was thinking, because with the jaw, I have difficulty with the jaw as well. But I was thinking, as above, so below. So it's like what's happening here is happening here. So my body, you do the scan, your body, I mean, it just tells us the truth. It just tells us the truth. But yeah, I think it's really important that we get educated on this. I think it would be just another another thing for us to just grow from and learn from and educate other women on, because I think women need to find their power.
Yes, yes, and there is this mention of this connection between the psoas and the jaw in one of the lectures too, and you know, you don't have to go far to understand that connection, especially if you think of sexual assault. You know, if somebody is overpowered by an attacker, and there's sexual activity going on, and all you know, you just have to endure it. Of course, you tighten your jaw just to endure it, or whether it's a beating or something along those lines. It is the floor and it is the jaw always to help you go through and push through that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, on a lighter note, I would just say there was once a young woman who was a fitness instructor, and I think it was in one of the summer resorts, and she was telling me once how she has all these big ideas for fitness classes involving the little trampolines for women. And she was so excited, and she thought it would work. And I thought to myself, I should probably tell her to ask women who have given birth about jumping on a trampoline before he tries to launch it, because there might not be a lot of interest for those classes. Yeah, so. Okay, Leah, I think you raised your hand there.
Yeah, just really quickly, because I do want to hear what you were going to say about Module 5. But I never had heard of the term pelvic health until just a few years ago, when my daughter went to one. It was like about a year after Ollie was born, just for the physical pelvic health side of things. So then I started looking into it, and I went to a I don't know, it was an event of some kind, and there was this booth, and it was Women's Health is actually the name of the clinic. And I went and talked to them, and they had classes on pelvic health. And I was like, okay, I need to learn more about this. So long story short, it's so important. I totally agree with you, Kathy, 100% on everything you said. And so I now am seeing an osteopath, massage therapist. They're all in the same clinic, and they have physiotherapists there as well. And their main focus is fascia, psoas muscle, and pelvic health. And I'm actually booking in for my first concentrated pelvic health session. And I'm not even really sure what she's going to. It's with the osteopath, but she's the one that does the pelvic health. And just working with the practitioners I've worked with over the past year, some of you know about my knee issues, no longer an issue, also because of the release. But I think what happens, and this is just a point I quickly wanted to make, was you're actually, when you're working with these therapists, unknowingly, you are doing trauma release. Right. So that just kind of hit me as you were talking, Kathy. I was like, yes, we're doing it with gentle trauma release. But the other, concentrated body work on those areas also, without you really knowing what it is you're releasing at least I didn't in the moment, but I always walked away feeling like not just the physical pain relief, but just lighter, and just like everything was right with my world. And I couldn't tell you until recently, like, why that was. And the more I learn about this, so I would also love to have more on the pelvic health or the pelvic region and how we can incorporate that as well. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, and it's exactly right. So a lot of these modalities, such as pelvic floor work or craniosacral therapy and other modalities, oftentimes the therapist gets to experience the client getting emotional and remembering something. So it's kind of like touching the body in a certain way and in certain spots. it helps the trauma to come to the surface and the memory. And of course, oftentimes though, there's no resolution for that when you go. So I just want to reassure everybody that with the main protocols, you have everything in one place, not just to find the trauma, that's what we do with the history taking, but mostly to resolve it and release it. So hopefully that makes sense. I just want to ask if there's somebody here who has experience with pelvic floor work. I know that, would you like to share with us just so everybody knows what that is about and what that entails, and, some of your experience to the point that you want to. Lucy, go ahead. I think I'll need you. Yes.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see all of you. Hang on one second to close the door.
Yes. Man in the house.
Yes, I'm getting the gist of this conversation, and I have worked extensively with the pelvic floor physiotherapist. I'll say it can be a form of trauma release, depending on how well informed the pelvic physiotherapist is. It's fairly new to the world of to physiotherapy that physiotherapists actually have to go for extra training in order to be able to do the pelvic work, because they actually can work, they can work internally, either vaginally or rectally, because they can access different muscles via the rectum versus the vagina. And it worked for me in terms of releasing trauma. And I wouldn't have known that unless I had gone to one, to know that the trauma could be stored that way. Thinking again, it's more of my own mental process too, in terms of, well, how do I deal with this and so forth. I will give you a quick snapshot to share personal experience. I think I'm doing this because I think you can benefit from understanding the depth of the potential. But before I go into the story, it's like first in my mind to say, not all pelvic therapists are created the same. I do know of some that train internationally as well. They're, as much as they're in Ontario, but there are bigger organizations to find out which therapist to consider and what kind of other modalities that they've studied along, say, trauma. So when I was a teenager, I was on a school trip. I happened to have abdominal pain. They thought that I had a appendicitis. So I go into emerge. It ends up being 2 young male doctors, no nurse present. One doctor leaves, the other one stays and does an extremely invasive internal examination. He leaves, and a second young male doctor comes in and does the same thing. At that point, I could feel myself split off and watch myself from in the corner of the room. And I was already in pain, let alone then endure the invasiveness of this supposed checking me out. And I held that. I never said anything. They ended up choosing to admit me. I spent a month in the hospital there. They couldn't find out anything, but they did all kinds of tests. This happened to fall not long after my dad had passed away, and my mother had a severe, well, then it was called nervous breakdown. And so I knew that I was carrying a lot of emotional baggage around my dad's death and so forth. So now I end up in this hospital. I have abdominal pain. They can't figure out what it is. Unfortunately, throughout the stay, there were other doctors who had come in, pulled the curtains closed, and said they would do an internal examination. At some point, I got sent to the gynecology department after having been sent to the psychiatry department. And in gynecology, it happened to be a woman doctor. And she said, well, if you don't mind, you can get ready and I would do an examination. And I said, and I started to cry, and I said, how many more internal examinations are they going to do here? And she literally took her hands, pushed herself back from the desk and said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, these are all the ones that have happened. And she said, none of that's in the record. So I carried on with my life. I sure as heck wasn't going to tell my mother, because I knew that she was still very emotionally fragile. And I buried it. I buried it in busyness and racing mind. And you name the kinds of examples that we study in GTR. I have experienced a lot of them. And so until I had a head injury where I couldn't function, and I managed to get to a psychotherapist who said, oh, tell me about your past and your childhood and so forth. And then as I gained trust and felt safe with her, I shared what had taken place. And then she actually named it. She said, Lucy, that's abuse. You were abused in a medical system. So I proceeded to live my life, 3 little kids, head injury, trying to raise them and so forth. But I continued to have pelvic issues. I ended up with a partial hysterectomy because I was told that the uterus was dropping. So it was this prolapse. Anyways, the surgeon that I went to see, it was never a consideration, and I still don't think it is in Canada today, to actually send women who have any kind of a pelvic issue to a pelvic therapist first before surgery is considered. I'm saying that because in hindsight, after the surgery, I found out that pelvic therapy may very well have corrected the issue that I had. Instead, I end up with a partial hysterectomy. I have meshing that straps from the front of my pelvis to the back, and the meshing holds up the uterus, but they basically, how do they do this now? No, I still have my ovaries. The uterus is gone. The meshing is there to hold up the bladder so that you don't have a bladder falling out. The vagina is attached to the bottom side of the meshing. So the meshing needs to do a really good job. Otherwise, the vagina can still collapse. But I was having issues, and had for a long time, with having pain with intercourse. And I am married 38 years. It's not an abusive situation between my husband and I. I was feeling physical pain. So I ended up, by chance, a woman in a fitness class mentioned to me, oh, Lucy, why don't you go see a pelvic floor physiotherapist? She says, there's one in not far. I book an appointment. I go to see her. It happens there's 2 sisters who are both trained in this. I see one of them, the one who happens to train internationally and so forth. And by about the 3rd examination, and she explained everything. So if you want to talk about like the perfect setup in terms of safety and trust, she said, the door is locked. No one can get in. I'm going to explain everything to you before I do this step by step. She stepped out of the room and I'm undressing from the waist down, covering myself. It wasn't a cheap piece of paper cloth either to cover yourself with. She had really pretty fabric that looked like a blanket to cover yourself. So, and it was cozy fabric. It was like flannel. I know I'm telling you the details because these were all the elements that lent to the sense of safety. When she came back in, she asked me how I was feeling and so forth. And she explained that she would be working internally, vaginally first, to see where there was potentially any grabbing from scar tissue from the surgery that I had had. And that eventually she could potentially work through the rectum because they can access certain muscles better rectally than they can vaginally. And so a number of appointments in, she has, I'll just say 2 fingers in my vagina. She is gently palpating to see where there is tension. The first times that she was doing this, I had no sensation. I couldn't tell you if her fingers were, they use a clock So imagine a clock on your abdomen with, 12, 3, 6, and 9. And so she would say, "Where are my fingers?" And I didn't know because I was so numbed out. Except she hit one spot, and I instinctively, I reached down with my other hand and I put my hand on her arm. And I asked her, "Please don't move your fingers. You're touching the memories." And as I held my hand on her arm, she never flinched. She looked me straight in the eyes and she said, "I am here with you." And in that moment, I could literally feel the tension where her fingers were, the tension in the vagina. It's as if they melted like warm butter. And the pain went with the tension. And then she very gently removed her fingers. This is not like going in, "Oh, let's just, And she sat with me and she looked me in my eyes. And she asked me to hold her gaze so that I could also release the shame that went with it. Darting your eyes and looking into the corners and all the rest of it. And I had shared with her what the memory was. And she said, she asked me, what did I feel I needed next? Did I want her to stay longer? Did I want her to leave so that I could get dressed and that we could chat afterwards? So I did that. She came back in, and then we, not fond of the phrase debriefing, it was a conversation, a heart-to-heart conversation. At that point, she held my hand as I told her details, and I have never had the pain since. And that was my experience with this therapist. I happened to be invited onto a conference with her and spoke to an international group and shared that so that therapists could understand the depth of what can surface for a woman when they're going for a pelvic appointment, thinking, "Oh, well, maybe there's this or that," but they can never know how much more is lurking in terms of traumas that haven't been dealt with, not surfaced, or all the shame and every other emotion that could potentially go with that. So if you're considering a pelvic floor physiotherapist, I suggest you do some homework and make sure that you are checking in with an organization and finding someone very reputable who has potentially other modalities that they have studied as well that complements what they're offering you. And so I have tremendous regard for that field. I know that in other countries, they've actually considered that women first see a pelvic therapist before they're having any vaginal/abdominal or hysterectomies, because we could do with a whole lot less surgeries if women had the opportunity to explore that first. And in that time frame working with her, though, I became more of myself because I could release that was not who I was, and yet it had held me back in lots of different ways. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. I can't thank you enough for sharing this. I think a lot of us needed to hear the story today to understand how trauma resides in the pelvic floor area, and why we want to incorporate the psoas muscle, and why the rock and soothe is part of every single recipe. Some of the other elements are not, but the rock and soothe is always there for this very specific reason. And when people say trauma resides in the body, trauma is in the body, that's literally how it happens. Those muscles tightening up in certain spots. And that's how it gets into the cells. The cells are in a certain way that they create these hard spots or these numb spots, and yeah, we release it through everything we do. Now, your therapist luckily for you and fortunately was able to incorporate all these aspects of what we incorporate in GTR too. So there was the direct gaze to engage you socially. There was the gentle touch. You said she touched you very gently.
That's right.
So that's another one. She allowed you to experience comfort as a way of feeling safety, you know, that cloth. That's why we always say if they can put a pillow behind their back or something on themselves that, you know, like a blanket after the basic recipe to bring more comfort, that creates a sense of safety. And then there was, of course, her very intentionally giving you what was taken away from you in that situation, which is a sense of power and control over your body. She gave you the choice to decide how you would prefer to be after the session, by, you know, making herself available to whatever you needed.
That's a fabulous summary, Isabella. I do want to also add, she did end up eventually working rectally because of the surgery. Surgery in and of itself is invasive from the standpoint of cutting and stitching and attaching and so forth. And then could release the tensions where the actual surgery was also done. So it serves in so many ways. I may have ended up in a pelvic therapist office even without the trauma piece in order to have less pain from the surgical procedure. So it can serve in so many different ways. So.
Yeah, and you know, this also demonstrates when I had a massage recently, it was a young girl doing it, the massage therapist, and she was relatively fresh out of school. She studies physiotherapy, and she was also doing that technique on me, lifting the skin to kind of unglue the fascia from the rest of the body. And by the way, it's incredible when they do it. Sometimes your back will crack. I thought it was her hands, but it's really your vertebrae just cracking. And I asked her if they were taught this at the university. She said, no, it's still not taught. But the truth is that I don't know, maybe you had the experience where you went to a massage therapist and you felt good afterwards, but then it didn't last for a very long time. And the reason for it was that you first have to do something about the fascia. And once that system is okay, then you go into the muscle. And so the same thing with GTR, all of these things that we do, they undeniably also affect the fascia. So we don't have to, you know, grab the muscle to release the tension from the jaw and the neck and the shoulders. We do all these other things so that it happens, including changing the clients or your breath that we do through just the rocking and soothing. Also the comfy spots, they're all spots that deepen the breath and release. For example, this one, it releases and opens your nose and deepens the breath that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taryn, I think your hand is up. Let me unmute you.
I just want to mention, thank you all for your comments. I feel safe here and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this with you. I hope that in some way it can inform you and benefit you. And if you have any other questions on this, please ask me, because I have done further research into that field and what they have to offer, or resources that you can reach out for. Leah, in particular, there is a specialist in Hamilton. I know you're in Toronto there, so it's Southwestern Ontario has a number of phenomenal pelvic physiotherapists. So
Thank you. Taryn, if you would like to say something, go ahead.
I'm just really curious about all of this, and it goes back again to not understanding what's going on sometimes in our bodies. And you know, over the past couple months, I've been really, the one area I've been having struggles with is in dating and relationship, you know, with men, which of course involves sexual relationships as well, and not relationships, but you know. And 2 years ago, when I started really healing and working on healing myself, I had never really paid attention to or gone to I would miss the pap smear and mammograms. If I didn't have to do them, I didn't care. It was no big deal. But when I started saying, Taryn, you're really going to pay attention to yourself, I wrote this whole list of all these things I had to do. And the first time I went to have my pap smear, I was in tremendous pain, like tremendous pain. And they told me that that was because I was older, that it gets dry down there. And I was like, gee, thanks, nice to know. I went to a therapist, went to get my pap, and then she also told me that because I was older, I didn't have to have a pap smear anymore because you only get it every 5 years and blah, blah, blah. And so I decided, well, I was just going to ask my doctor, and I was going to go to a GYN and talk to them. And she said, you should always have one. You don't have to have one, but you should always have one. And so I had one, been 2 weeks ago, and there was no pain and there was nothing wrong with my body. And I'm thinking, well, what's the difference between that time a year ago, it was a year ago, and this time? What's the difference? And you're sitting here telling me about this as it relates to trauma. And I'm thinking, wow, this is not, it's your body getting healthy just all over the place. Your body's just getting, and I don't think I ever saw my body as a body. It was always parts. I got to get this, I got to get this, I got to do this because that's what you're supposed to do, and not really knowing. And so I'm wondering how your pelvic floor relates to relationships and choices that you make as it relates to relationships, because I tend to feel, okay, I'm going to say this, but I feel safer in my body when sex is first before the relationship. And so I've been working really hard to change that story. I mean, that's not my thing. I fight it a lot now. It's like me saying, I'm not going into the sexual relationship because I'm just getting to know you. I'm just getting to understand who you are. But I know in my heart that it's still really hard for me, because it would be a hell of a lot easier just to have the sex and let him leave or decide we're not going to work out or whatever the case may be. And I'm just find that I'm in I know that I have a trauma thing here going on, but I don't really know what it is or where it is. So the pelvic floor is where it's at.
Yeah. I think in your case, and I will say it just because you mentioned it openly in some of these virtual office hours, you shared that the relationship with your husband was the exact opposite.
Yeah, no sex for 18 years.
Yes. So it might be a way for you to take your power back and to kind of reverse the order just now.
I'd like to add to this that your pelvic floor also moves in unison with your breathing mechanisms, predominantly the diaphragm. The diaphragm is like this parachute. And unless all of the attachment points into the abdominal area where your diaphragm is all around, it creates, depending on how your breathing is, whether it's shallow or restricted, also changes how the diaphragm functions, which also affects how the pelvic floor functions, because they work together. And so it happens it's part of the studying that I have done on the side for my own sake, and in terms of how to actually even massage your diaphragm so that all of your sex organs actually function better as well and move better, just have more freedom.
Yeah.
And so forth.
I think we definitely have to add something to the graduate club about this. But Taryn, I do want to say, coming back to your question, if I may, Lucy, that I think the bottom line of this is that for us women, the pelvic area is a source of our power, because it's where our feminine sexuality resides. And so it is deeply affected by assault and sexual trauma, but it can also be the place to start to take your power back. And I remember with my relationships, I, kind of followed the rules in that, you get to know the guy and you are with them, you kind of test them, are they going to stick around? And then you become intimate. And then at one point, I met somebody, I said, I'm going to do it the other way around. The relationships that I had were great, but they were not optimal for me. And I did do it the other way around, being, at peace with the fact that that's where it might begin, or that's where it might end. And I've stayed with him for, it's my current partner, Daniel. So I'm just saying it doesn't have to be just the source of trauma. It can be also a source of deep healing and taking your power back. And so you think of what that is for you at this time.
Thank you. Interesting. Got a lot to think
Yeah.
about.
Yes. So we very obviously didn't get to module 5 today, and I'll promise to go back to that whenever we have the next opportunity. Thank you so much for sharing, and we'll keep bringing you all the good stuff to support you, not just as GTR practitioners, but as people and as women. Thank you for coming, ladies. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Graduate Club members, if you'd like to stay, I'll stay on the line.